Hello everybody. This video is the first in a series on how to set up a self-hosted web server. This machine we're looking at right now is a brand new virtual machine running on a not actually Citrix Xen server, but it's running on a Xen server that I have built using Debian. This is a Debian 9 installation here, and you'll see it's extremely minimal. The only things on here are the bare essentials needed to run the system. We're currently consuming 50 meg of memory, no swap, and we've got 2 processor cores allocated to the machine. A total of 1 gig of memory allocated as well. So that's what we're working with. The host name is YT for YouTube, and this will be an example server. Already I've configured SSH to allow me to remote into the system. It has a real IP address. It also has a firewall configured already, which we can list that, which currently is just accepting existing related connections, and SSH. We've moved SSH as well onto a different port just for a bit of added protection, because this server is exposed. It has a real IP address, and this server will stay up for the duration of this series in order to teach and to build on each episode. So to get started, our goal today is to install a web server just to do basic static hosting. Currently, we need to expose the IP address of this machine. Obviously, I'm going to stick a domain on it, stick a subdomain on it so that it's accessible under my own site. But so that it can be accessed and maintained, I might as well give you guys the address. You're going to need to know it anyway. So if you have a look there, our Ethernet address, our MAC address, etc. MAC address is actually a virtual address, but what's important is that fellow there. So we're at 139.99.139.63. That's a real address. So first thing to do is just to show we do not have a web server running on this. We're on PSAUX and look for, say, Nginx, which is not there. We'll look for Apache, which is not there. We can also use netstat to look for port 80. Oh, we don't have netstat installed. Oh, we'll install that. Now, what package is that in? I don't think it's any of those. NetTools, I believe, is what we're looking for. Yep. So netstack, we're going to numeric listing. We don't want to list the do DNS lookups. We don't care about that at this point. Verbose, list listening applications, and list the program that's listening as well. So netstat nvlp, and you'll see the only thing that's listening at this point is SSH plus various things on sockets that are local. So nothing to worry about. So we're now going to install a web server. The web server of my personal choice is Nginx. It performs incredibly well, easy to configure, uses very little memory on the system. It's very quick. And as far as comparing it to Apache, it's sort of like a Ferrari. Apache is really old, it's robust and works well, but it is slow in comparison. Perhaps the newer versions, I haven't used Apache in some time now. The later versions of Apache may have improved, but in my experience, for a low memory machine and high performance machine, Nginx generally is more configurable and quicker and much easier to work with. So first things first is we're going to install it. So simple apt get install Nginx. Obviously it's going to pull in various other packages. So we're just going to say yes and accept that. All right, that's simple. Nginx is now running. It's already listening. Again, we can use netstat to list, and you'll see now we have Nginx listening on port 80, both on IPv4 and on IPv6. Next thing is to open the firewall up so it can be accessed, because currently the only thing we're allowing in is SSH. I've also installed the netfilter persistent package. It's just a simple package for Debian and Ubuntu. I believe there's a CentOS version of it too, called like IP tables persistent or something. But it just lets us save and load IP table rules that start and stop. So again, we'll list our current rules. You'll see we have 2 accepts and a drop rule. we need to add another accept rule for Nginx or for HTTP traffic. So we're going to add a entry. We're going to insert. If we add, it's going to add it after the drop rule. We want to insert it just before the drop rule, preferably, just before the drop rule. So index 1 would be on the top, index 2 second, index 3 third. So we're going to go for index 3. So insert position 3. Protocol is TCP. The destination port is 80, and we're going to accept traffic. We also need to name the chain. Input chain. So insert into the input chain, position 3, protocol is TCP, destination port is 80, and jump target is accept. So you'll now see we have an accept rule here. We need to now save this so that when the system is rebooted, this rule comes back. So netfilter persistent, save. That's it. We now have a functioning HTTP server running. So if I launch Chrome and we go to, what was the IP address of this machine? There we go. There we go. Fully functional web server without any processing yet. Next, we need to make this sort of useful. There's several ways to use Nginx. By default, it's going to put all its web files in var www, and you'll actually see a HTML directory there. And there's that content we're looking at right now. The problem is that whenever you update Nginx, or maybe you remove it later, or who knows, whatever, this file being part of the package is going to get modified, or it's not going to get modified. Debian's pretty clever and it's going to say, hey, there's a conflicting change here. You've changed this file and the update has this file in it too. What do you want to do? That can be a pain in the bum. So what we really want to do is avoid touching these system files. We should also run Nginx under a user to isolate its access to things. This is where a lot of people go wrong, is that they'll either work in this directory and leave everything owned by root. They might have multiple websites all running as the same user, and then what can happen is if one site's compromised, it can be used to compromise the other sites on the server as well. There's still ways around that even with user separation, but it makes it harder for the attacker. So no need to make their job easy when it's fairly easy for us to do things in a secure manner. We're not going to cover things like AppArmor or SE Linux and so on in these guides. We're just going to cover the basics of Linux security and user separation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an account that we're going to put the web files under. Under Debian, that's very simple. We're just going to go add user and pick a username. So in this example, we're just going to call this YT for YouTube. We're going to need to enter a password. You could create this as a passwordless account, but I actually want to put a password on this and allow you to log into this, not you, but to allow it to be logged into so that it can be used and you can manage the web files as that user without messing up permissions on the system, as well as for safety. So we're going to choose a password. We don't need to specify any real details on this account because it's not a real person. And we now will have a user in home called YT. Now, this is a personal choice, and it's also sort of a common theme if you've ever worked with cPanel servers and so forth, is to put your web files into a directory called public_HTML. It's sort of a legacy thing. A lot of applications will actually, web apps will actually expect to find a public HTML directory. So it's actually good to sort of stick to that just to make your life a bit easier. So in this directory, we're going to make a directory called public HTML. Now, because I'm root, that'll be owned by root. We need to fix that. So now we'll change its ownership to YT and its group to YT. Ooh. Okay. Now, Nginx is going to be need to be able to read files inside that directory. There's several ways to do this. We could leave it right now. Its ownership is good. It's Owners is read, write, execute. So the owner can read files in it, they can write files in it, and they can execute scripts, or they enter directories and list their contents. The group can read and enter and list directory contents. They can't write. Everybody else on the server, any user, is able to read and execute as well. That's not optimal. We don't really want to allow other users, if we do have multiple sites in multiple accounts, to be able to access and read the content of files, especially if files in here might contain sensitive info, such as, say, a htaccess file or htpassword file. It contains password hashes. Or even a website that contains a config, like a PHP config that contains database connectivity details. So what we're going to do is remove the global read execute from that simply by going chmod. We want other equals nothing. So you'll now see that everyone else has no access to this directory. Really, we could do it on the whole account, but for now, let's do what we're going to do. Now, Nginx needs to be able to read the files in there. It's not going to be able to now. So the way I like to solve this problem is to add Nginx to the YT group. And that's very simple. We just go add user. This again is Debian specific. Under CentOS and stuff, you have to use user mod. But under Debian, it's quite simple. We just say add user. Under Debian, the Nginx user is www.data. It's the same for Apache under Debian. It'll be www.data. We're going to add that user to the YouTube or YT account. So now if we go get ENT password and www.data, get ENT. Wrong command, sorry. We want to go ID www.data. There we go. You can see it's now in both the www.data group and the YouTube group. There's one more thing to do. Under Linux, permissions don't apply to applications until they're restarted. It's when they're launched is when it's all allocated by the kernel. So we need to restart Nginx. But it won't matter anyway because we haven't yet put Nginx config in there for it to read files out of this directory. So now what we're going to do is go and have a look. Actually, first we'll put a single file in here just to show it's working. So we'll create an index HTML. We'll just do a basic it works. All right, so we've got a basic file. Again, because I was root, that file is owned by root. We should fix its permissions. Later, we'll actually log in as the YT account and do these things, and then we don't have to muck about with permissions all the time. And again, we're going to remove everyone else's read access to that file to keep it secure. So now we need to configure Nginx to read from that directory and to use that directory. So we're going to etc Nginx. You see we have several files there. Actually, just to make that easier for you guys to read, I'm going to alias ls to ls color. There we go, so you can see directories a bit easier. So we've got several directories in here. Now, Debian often does this. If you see a directory that's got the .d suffix on it, that is either been patched in by Debian in the package they've produced, or even it might already be supported by the package, it depends. But Debian are very good at adding this to packages that it's missing for. And what that generally is a directory that any config files you place inside it are automatically grabbed and included into the global config of the application. That's handy because we now don't have to edit the files that come with the package. The advantage to that is when we upgrade Nginx in the future, if there's new versions of these config, if you've edited them, apt is going to complain. It's going to say, hey, you've made local changes. You now got to go and merge them. You got to compare them and figure out your differences and sort of maintain those files individually because it doesn't know what to do. Usually it's pretty okay and it won't mess things up. But it can be a nightmare later to maintain because you might forget exactly what things you've changed in the file, what's been tuned and tweaked. So it's best to override the existing settings by providing extra config files. There's several folders here. Like I said, the conf.d is general configuration. So like module config, global config stuff. We also have modules available, modules enabled, sites available, sites enabled. They're the main directories we need to worry about here. If we have a look in modules available, then there's nothing there because we haven't installed any. Nginx has pluggable modules in the more recent versions, and what will happen is you install them, the default configs for them will turn up in this directory. They're not enabled though, they're just available to be enabled. So what you'd do if you wanted to enable one, you'd go into the modules enabled directory. You can see here we've already got some symlinked to the user share Nginx as a global system directory. So we've got authpam, davmod, echomod, geoip, and so on. And these are symlinked. If you wanted to add one yourself that's in the modules available directory, you wouldn't just create the file here. You would actually link it using ln-s for a symbolic link to modules available, and then whatever the name of the module is, and link it into this directory. Preferably with a numerical index. So you can see all of these start with 50. The reason for that is ordering. Nginx will load these in the numerical order. So if you say prefix it with 10, it'll load that before the 50s. If you prefix it with, say, 60, it'll load the 60 for last. Because sometimes you need to change the ordering of these loading. I actually haven't found an instance with Nginx yet where I have had to mess with the ordering, but it is there if you happen to need it at some point. Now, sites available and enabled is the exact same deal, except instead of being modules, it's actually the site configs. So if we go into sites available, there is a default one that comes with the installation called default. If we have a look at that, you'll see lots of comments about this, but this is the default server, and that's what's over here. That's what's serving this out. And you'll see our root here is var www.html. Default index, server name is the default server, so it'll match anything. And its location to how to find files, basically. Again, we don't want to edit this. This is part of the default installation. If we edit this, when apt does an upgrade, it's going to say, hey, you got clashes, etc. So instead of that, if we go back up a directory into the sites enabled, you'll see we have default is symlinked to that file. When you upgrade apt, it won't touch this directory. It won't complain. It won't try and overwrite files in it. So instead of editing the default, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the symlink. And that's it. We've effectively disabled that config without editing the file. So now we're also going to create a new config for our YT user. So we'll go back into sites available. And I personally like to name them based on the username. So we're just going to say YT. Hold on a sec, sorry. Yeah, just YT. And then we need to define our Nginx server. So we're just going to server. We're going to listen on port 80. You could listen on IPv6 too if you want, but we don't have an IPv6 address assigned to this machine. I'm not going to bother to either, so we're not going to do that here. Server name. This server doesn't have a name yet, so we're just going to tell it to match everything. We also need to tell it here to be the default server. So when there's no host name specified, such as when you hit it by IP address, it's going to match this server first. You can only have one default server per port. So on 80, this is going to be our default server. Server name is anything. It doesn't matter. We're just going to match whatever comes in. And then we're going to tell it where files are. So our root is in home, YT, public, HTML. Now we also need to tell it how to find our index if there's no URI specified, like we haven't got a /index on here. So we say index is index.html. You can specify a list and it will look for one that matches. And then we need to also tell it what to do when a URI does come in. So we do a location match for the root directory. That'll match everything. And Nginx has a directive called try files, and it's going to try to find this list in order in the directory. So first we're going to try and find the actual URI. So if we've put it on there slash, say, test.html, it'll look for the file test.html first. We also want to try and look for directories. So if we have a directory that's got a default index in it, we need that too. And then we're going to say, okay, well, if you didn't find either of these, let's throw in 404 error. Oops, 404. You could actually put on this, say, index.php, and make it that if it can't find a file, we can can't find the address specified, we can redirect it to a script that can do some processing, maybe a search engine optimized URL. But we're not going to do that for now, so we're just going to try files that, and I think that's all we need. Now, good practice is to test your config before you restart Nginx. Doesn't matter how experienced you are with it. If you try and restart Nginx or reload it, or reload's not so bad, but restart Nginx without testing your config and there's an error in it, you'll take the server offline because Nginx will fail to start because you've got an error in your config. Simplest way to do that is just nginx-t. And you'll see our config's okay. The only thing is here, we're not yet loading our new config because we've created the file here in sites available, but we haven't symbolically linked it into sites enabled. First thing I'm going to do though, just for consistency, is rename this. I should have done this in the first place, to yt.conf. Just because that's actually what it's going to be looking for. So now we're going to sites enabled, and we do a symbolic link from sites available, yt.conf, and we'll say 10yt.conf. So you'll see now we have that link in there. Now it's actually going to be loaded by Nginx. We need to test our config. You'll see no errors. Brilliant. So we can now safely restart or reload Nginx. Usually a reload is enough. And that's generally what we want to do, because if you restart Nginx while it's in use and you've got visitors on your website, you're going to terminate their sessions and existing connections, and they're going to get thrown up with a connection terminated error, or who knows, maybe half a page gets served to them and it gets aborted. Instead, you want to reload. Nginx is very good at this. When you do a reload, it lets existing sessions complete, and as soon as they do, each thread then goes, hold on, config's reloaded, and it will then go and reload its config and then continue operation. Any that are already idle will get reloaded instantly. To restart, again, this system's running systemd, so we can just go systemctl, reload Nginx, and that's it, done. So over here now, if we reload this, we'll get our new index. Notice that Nginx can access that file because we put it in the Nginx group, in the www data group. We don't have to do any silly chmod 777 like a lot of people recommend you do, which is, by the way, very dangerous. You should never do that. There's no excuse for it. You really do need to learn how permissions work under Linux if you're doing that. Anyway, we'll go back to the home directory of the user. And you can see the file there again. Permissions do not allow anyone but this user and this group to access this file. Nginx only has read access, which is all it needs and all it will ever need. Because when we're going to start doing things like adding PHP to this, we're going to make PHP run as the YT user. And because it is running as that user, it will have write access. But the actual web server, Nginx, won't. It provides a nice layer of isolation between the two and a nice layer of security, keeping them separate. So I think that's all we're going to cover in this video. There's a fair bit of content here to go through. I've gone fairly quick. As far as the Nginx configuration is concerned, there is a lot of ways you can configure it, and I'm not going to cover them. There is excellent documentation for Nginx on their own website, plus tons of resources on how to build the Nginx config out. There are some gotchas too that are not immediately obvious that can cause security problems, specifically things like using the host variable in the server name. That's quite dangerous with a redirect, or pulling in Nginx content. But we're not going to go into that. We're going to actually go through a step-by-step how to build this server out, how to put PHP on it. We're also going to put MySQL on it and get a basic site operational. This site and this server will stay live. You can actually go to this IP address and you'll be able to see, hey, it works. And as we progress this tutorial, this page will get more features and we'll start to see more things on it. Anyway, that's the end of it for this one. Let me know what you think. Like I said in my last video, all of this work is done basically out of my free time. I'm not getting paid for this. If you do want to support this and help this to proceed and you'll like what I'm doing, please donate down in the comments below. I'll list my Patreon and my PayPal, as well as help support the work I do, not just here, but with the other projects like Looking Glass, as well as try to provide good content and to justify my time in building these things for you. Anyway, that's the end of it here, and thank you for listening.